So in my video I put out last weekend, I said that if you guys have any questions or want to see anything more in detail, that I'll do my best to answer them and possibly shoot another video on it. So I had a viewer ask some good questions, a lot to do with just materials and the process of bonding them together for this kit. So just quickly wanted to go over the materials. The flaps and ailerons are a great example because I think every material is in them. We got the aluminum leading edge here on the aileron. It's 6061 T6 aluminum. We have 4130 chromoly hinge brackets that are epoxied and riveted to the aluminum spar on the aileron, and then we have wood ribs. The flaps are a little different. They have not a carbon fiber, but a fiberglass leading edge. Otherwise, they're built pretty much the same as the ailerons. All the steel parts, including the fuselage that's welded, is 4130. They're all painted. So I've got the fuselage here. It's hard to see. The doors and the windows are hanging up there, and the rest of my steel parts are hanging over here. The aluminum, just going to keep raw, and I make sure that it's clean before I'm going to cover it. Another question that viewer had was how materials get bonded in the kit, in this airplane kit, and how to deal with corrosion, especially from the wood parts to the steel parts. Let's go over how these steel hinge brackets get glued and epoxied onto the wood rib. I'm going to show you how I prep. These are steel parts. They're painted already. So I'm going to show you how I prep these to get glued onto the wood rib webbing. This one's already done. You can see this part here is what's getting glued to the wood, and I've taken the emery cloth and roughed it up some. You can see the shiny part is going to stick out of the trailing edge, and this is the hinge point for the flap here. So what I've done is I've put the piece of tape, that's kind of where the trailing edge of the wing stops, and the rest of that piece is going to hang out. So I don't want to glue or sand any part out here. So I just take my emery cloth, rough this up. There's a two-part epoxy finish, or I should say primer. It's white, and then the top coat is a two-part black. So I get it roughed up like so. I use acetone on, I use acetone on the painted parts. It's a little less harsh than MEK, and if I'm doing aluminum, I will use MEK because I'm not worried about stripping paint. I think the MEK is a little too powerful on the black painted parts. And then we just wipe it off with some acetone. And now we've got a part that's ready to be glued. These are steel parts, so they're painted. I'm really just roughing up the paint. The aluminum parts go on bare aluminum, and I try and sand them with the emery cloth and not delay it all for the gluing process, because the aluminum starts to corrode and oxidize pretty much instantly after you clean it. Over on the wing, I have the holes drilled for the rivets for the brackets. This is how an aileron hinge bracket goes in. So the steel part's got to get glued to the wood, and I'll show you now how I prep the wood. I just sand lightly, make sure it's smooth with some, this is 100 grit sandpaper. You can use 100, 150. Just want to make sure it's smooth and clean. Most of the wood parts on this airplane are smooth and clean when you get them. They get dusty though when you're working. They don't need a bunch of sanding. And then I blow them off with compressed air. So now I'd consider my steel hinge bracket and my wood piece ready to be epoxied and riveted. This is the epoxy that I use for the parts. This one's Loctite. I think 3M makes a similar product, just a structural epoxy. And I've made this here instead of buying it's like a giant caulk gun for it. It cost a few $100s. You just slide those dowels in here like that, and you can squeeze it with the clamp. So how I mix it up is I squeeze equal parts into a bag like this. This one's all dried up and left over from last time. Mix it all up, twist the bag, get it all in the corner, cut the tip off the corner, and then you can squeeze it out, and it works pretty good. I'm going to try to get all those done in one shot. That's why I'm not going to show you live of doing the epoxy. I got about an hour to work with it. And the shop here is at about 60, 65 degrees. Another thing I wanted to talk about was how to prevent corrosion, especially from dissimilar parts on aluminum and wood and steel. So anytime two dissimilar materials are being attached on this project, there's a barrier of some sort. Here we have a wood rib being glued to an aluminum spar, and you have your 3M epoxy here. So really no part of the wood and the aluminum are touching. The epoxy's a barrier and an adhesive. Here's the trailing edge of the rib, or trailing edge of the wing glued to the wood rib. So there we have an aluminum and wood joint. Here's an example of a steel joint on aluminum. This is the lift strut bracket. I have my lift struts in. I have them covered in foam to protect them. So the lift strut's steel, and it's been painted with 2-part epoxy and then 2-part top coat, so it's black. It is also epoxied before it's riveted. So not only does it have paint as a barrier, but we also have epoxy as a barrier, and then it's riveted.